Then proceeded a certain amount of culture shock. We went from one of the great restaurant places in the world to a town of 12,000 that had 2 restaurants, both of them bad. 18,000 students, 12,000 people in the community. A very, very different kind of life than we had had almost anywhere. I mean, even Winter Park was more interesting than Athens, Ohio. The work was fine, the students were good, ran the same kind of professional training program there, but the living was not exactly for us. As Wayne said at the time, Athens, great for kids, creepy for adults. That was pretty much what it is. So my friend Paul Hostetler from Tulane, who had gone to Temple University as chairman of that department, wanted to start an MFA program in acting, and so he came after me, and we accepted a position to go to Temple and to begin another MFA program in acting. So in 1969, we now moved from Athens, Ohio, to Philadelphia. We actually bought a house in New Jersey, but Temple is in Philadelphia. So the irony of it, here's poor Molly. I take her away from California, we go to Florida, we stay there 9 years, then we move to New Orleans, which is closer to California. She's feeling encouraged, so we're there for 2 years. Then we move almost directly north to Ohio University, and so that's now 13 years, and now we're back on the East Coast. She was not too happy about that. So we moved, we lived in Cherry Hill, which was across the river, because the kids were not enthusiastic about living in Philadelphia because they had had their fill of cities in New Orleans. It was not as great for them in New Orleans as it was for us. So we bought a house, a tract house, a big tract house. We bought a 3,100 square foot tract house for $31,000, $10 a square foot, and moved in there. And again, you know, somehow we managed to have a good time in the Philadelphia area. We made some wonderful friends. The work was good, the teaching was fine. So much so that we stayed, instead of the usual 2 years, we actually stayed for 3 years in Philadelphia. We would get into New York. It was a little bit livelier, let's say. Although the university was in a very bad part of Philadelphia. There were gunshots, you know, going on all the time. I was in rehearsal, and I had a commute, of course. So meanwhile, Monroe Lipman had left NYU and had gone to the University of California at Riverside as chairman of the department there. And Monroe wanted to retire from the chairmanship, but he wanted to make sure that he was going to continue teaching, and so he thought he needed somebody close to him to come on the job. And so he began to recruit me, which was ironic. He's recruiting me away from Paul Hostetler, who was like a son to him. But Monroe said, no, it's professional, and that's the way he was proceeding. So I began my, my conversations with the University of California at Riverside, and we were pretty excited that he was a possibility to go back to California. Well, some short time after beginning the talk with Riverside, I had a call from UC San Diego, from 2 former colleagues who were on the campus, sort of doing some theater work, but without a formal theater department. So they called, Eric Christmas and Floyd Gaffney, to see whether I would be interested in interviewing for the chairmanship there, which was a very, very interesting and coincidental kind of thing, which had to do with Tulane and with UCSD. Because when we were leaving Tulane, and we were doing all this interviewing. Richard Schechner, as I said, who was a very good friend and who edited the Tulane Drama Review, was invited to La Jolla by Jon Stewart and Bob Peterson to talk about a revival of the La Jolla Playhouse and what part he might have in it. And so he came out to La Jolla, and he went out on a yacht with them, and they talked to him about this, and they wanted him to start a theater institute and a magazine. And in the course of those conversations, he asked them, it was Michael Langham. They had hired Michael Langham to be the director of a non-existent theater company and the chairman of a non-existent drama department. And they asked him whether there was going to be a professional actor training program. And he said, yes, there was, but that it was going to be at the theater and not at the university. And Richard said, well, you should really talk to my friend Arthur Wagner. So about 2 or 3 weeks after Richard returned from that visit, I got a call from Jon Stewart at UCSD. No, I'm sorry. I got the call from Michael Langham, who called me from Stratford in Canada, where he was the artistic director, and said that I should call Jon Stewart at UCSD and have him arrange for me to fly up to Stratford to meet with him, to talk about UCSD, which is what I did. And so I flew up in the middle of the winter to New London, drove to Stratford, spent the whole day with Langham talking about the possibilities, came back to Tulane, never heard another word. So here we are now, what is it, 4 or 5 years later. That was probably in 1967, so in 1971, 4 years later, now I'm being invited to come out and interview for the chairmanship at UCSD. So that's what I did. I interviewed at both Riverside and UCSD. I spent 2 days at UCSD, and then Eric and Floyd drove me to Riverside, and I spent 2 days there, and then I had to make a decision. I was offered the position at both places. Our kids said, we'll go to, how they put it, we'll go to UCSD, but not UC Riverside. Somehow they had heard that it was smoggy in Riverside, which of course it was. So actually the decision, was not all that difficult to make. Riverside had an established theater department. It would have been very easy to get things started there. Of course, Monroe was a very close connection. But San Diego was a question of living, because I was not so much making a professional change here as we were making a sort of a lifestyle kind of change, moving back to California. So it was pretty easy for us to make the decision to come to UCSD. So then we had to get rid of our house in New Jersey, and we drove cross country in a folk